Imagine a young hockey player with one leg, outskating every obstacle life has thrown at him. Now picture Keanu Reeves watching silently from the shadows, drawn to the boy's relentless determination. What happens when their worlds collide will not only shock you, it will leave you inspired in ways you never expected. Stay with us to see how a Hollywood icon changes the fate of a rising star against all odds. Before we jump into this inspiring story, take a moment to comment below where you're watching from today. And while you're here, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more powerful stories that will leave you motivated and moved long after the credits roll. It was a cold winter night, the kind of cold that seemed to settle into your bones, making each breath visible in the icy air. The faint hum of the city lingered in the distance, but at the local outdoor hockey rink in Toronto, the only sounds were the scrape of blades cutting across the ice. A group of players skated under the soft glow of overhead lights. Their movements were swift and coordinated, but one figure stood out: Elliot Kramer. Young, wiry, and visibly determined. He moved differently, not with the same fluidity as the others, but with more grit. His left leg was a prosthetic, and each stride was a testament to his sheer will. Elliot wasn't just practicing, he was pushing himself harder than anyone else on the ice. His breaths came in sharp bursts, visible against the night sky. His focus was unwavering as he weaved through cones, firing shots at an invisible goalie, and skating laps long after the others had stopped. In the shadows near the rink, a man stood quietly, almost blending into the night. A wool scarf wrapped around his neck and a beanie pulled low over his head. He held a cup of steaming coffee, the warmth contrasting sharply with the freezing air. This man was Keanu Reeves. To anyone passing by, he would seem like just another spectator, but his presence carried an air of quiet curiosity. His gaze never left the young man on the ice. Why was he there? What had drawn him to this unassuming community rink on such a bitter night? As the players wrapped up their session and filed off the ice, Elliot stayed behind. Keanu remained rooted in place, watching the lone figure with an intensity that hinted at something deeper. Keanu Reeves wasn't merely an observer that night. Hockey had been an integral part of his youth. Before the lights of Hollywood had found him, he'd been a goalie, known among his teammates as The Wall. The ice rink had once been his sanctuary, a place where effort and focus drowned out the noise of the world. Watching Elliot brought those memories rushing back, and though his fame and career had taken him far from those days, the sight of the young man stirred something deep inside him. Elliot Kramer was the reason Keanu lingered. At first glance, Elliot appeared like any other athlete pushing himself to improve. But the more Keanu observed, the more he realized Elliot was different. The young man's prosthetic leg, visible just below the hem of his hockey shorts, told a story of resilience. Each movement Elliot made was deliberate, as though every stride on the ice was a triumph against odds no one else could imagine. He wasn't as fast as the others, but his focus and tenacity made him stand out. The young man skated harder, stayed longer, and repeated drills until his exhaustion was evident, yet he never stopped. Keanu noticed something else, too, a flicker of frustration hidden behind Elliot's determined expression. A frustration that seemed to grow whenever he glanced toward the empty stands, as though waiting for something, or someone, that never arrived. As Keanu watched, another figure stepped onto the rink, interrupting Elliot's drills. Coach Liam McCoy. His voice carried a gruff edge, but there was warmth in his tone as he shouted instructions to Elliot. "Keep your head up. Timing over speed." The coach, a rugged man with silver-streaked hair and a worn jacket, exuded the presence of someone who'd lived his life in the world of hockey. He had the air of a man who cared deeply about his players, even if he rarely showed it outright. Coach McCoy was more than a mentor to Elliot. He had taken the young man under his wing after hearing about the accident that had taken his leg. To him, Elliot wasn't a project or a charity case. He was a fighter with untapped potential. Liam often stayed late after practices, pushing Elliot to his limits, but always ensuring he felt supported. Tonight was no different. Standing near the boards, Amy Kramer watched her brother. She clutched a steaming thermos, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and worry. Amy had become Elliot's rock since the accident. Younger by 3 years, but far wiser than her age suggested, she had taken on every burden imaginable to help her brother. Working 2 jobs and sacrificing her personal ambitions, She had ensured Elliot had the resources to stay in the game he loved. Her unwavering belief in him was evident in every look and word she shared. As Elliot skated toward her during a break, Amy handed him the thermos. "You're pushing too hard," she said softly, her voice firm but tinged with concern. "You need to rest." "I can't stop now, Amy," Elliot replied, his voice steady despite the exhaustion etched on his face. "This is all I've got. I'm not letting anyone take it from me." Keanu caught the exchange from where he stood. Though he couldn't hear their words, the emotion between the siblings was unmistakable. Something about their bond resonated with him. As the pair left the rink, Amy supporting her brother as he limped slightly off the ice, Keanu's curiosity deepened. Why did Elliot push himself so hard? What was he trying to prove, and to whom? And what role did the worn-out coach and the devoted sister play in this story? Questions began to swirl in Keanu's mind, pulling him further into a world he hadn't intended to step into that night. The rink was quiet now, the players long gone. Keanu lingered, his curiosity about Elliot growing stronger. The faint creak of footsteps on the icy ground caught his attention. Coach Liam McCoy approached, his usual gruff demeanor softened by the solitude of the moment. "You been watching him?" Liam remarked, his voice low but direct. Keanu turned toward the older man, surprised but intrigued. "I have," Keanu admitted. "The kid's got heart. What's his story?" Liam hesitated, glancing toward the now empty ice. "It's not my tale to tell," he said at first, but something in Keanu's genuine interest loosened his guard. After a moment he sighed. Elliot was meant for greatness. 2 years ago he was the talk of the junior leagues, fast, smart, fearless. Scouts from the big leagues had their eyes on him. Then it all came crashing down. Keanu stayed silent, his focus unwavering as Liam continued. "It was the night before the championship. A drunk driver ran a red light. Elliot's car didn't stand a chance. He lost his leg. Just like that, everything he'd worked for was gone." The weight of Liam's words hung in the air. Keanu's expression tightened, but he said nothing, allowing the coach to continue. For a while he was a ghost of himself. Locked in his room, didn't speak to anyone. We all thought hockey was over for him. Liam's voice grew softer. But that sister of his, Amy, she wouldn't let him give up. She dragged him out of the darkness, piece by piece. She got him into rehab, helped him learn to use that prosthetic, and even scraped together enough money to get him back on the ice. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't be here now. Keanu glanced toward the direction where Elliot and Amy had disappeared earlier. "She's a force," he said, admiration clear in his tone. "She is," Liam agreed. "But it hasn't been easy. Even with his talent, Elliot's been shut out of every league he's tried to join. They all say the same thing. He's not a good fit. But it doesn't add up. The kid's got more drive than anyone I've ever seen. Something else is going on, but nobody's talking." Keanu's brow furrowed. The pieces didn't fit. Elliot's skill and determination were undeniable, yet he was being pushed aside. The reasons were vague, the rejections too consistent to be a coincidence. There was something beneath the surface, something that didn't sit right. As Liam turned to leave, he looked back at Keanu. "If you're here because of some Hollywood script or publicity thing, save it. That kid doesn't need pity, he needs a chance." Keanu didn't reply, but Liam's words lingered. He wasn't there for a script or a photo op. He was there because Elliot's story struck a chord, one he couldn't ignore. As the cold wind picked up, Keanu's gaze shifted back to the empty rink. The faintest trace of a plan was beginning to form in his mind. Whatever was keeping Elliot from advancing wasn't just unfair, it was wrong, and Keanu wasn't the type to look the other way. Keanu couldn't shake the conversation with Coach Liam from his mind. As the icy night deepened, he found himself drawn back to the rink the next day. It wasn't enough to simply observe anymore. He needed answers. Approaching Liam, Keanu's usual calm demeanor carried a quiet intensity. "There's more to this, isn't there?" he asked. "Elliot's not just fighting the odds, he's fighting something bigger." Liam paused, visibly uncomfortable. He adjusted his scarf, stalling for time. "Look," he said finally, his voice low. "The kid's been through enough without dragging more people into his mess." "Not just more people," Keanu replied, his voice steady. "I want to help, but I can't if I don't know what's really going on." Liam sighed heavily, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. It's not just his leg, he admitted. There's politics in this town. People with influence who'd rather see him off the ice for good. Some folks think letting him play makes the rest of the team look weak. Others, well, let's just say grudges run deep. Keanu's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting Liam's words sink in. The pieces were starting to fit together, but they still felt incomplete. There was more at play here, something unspoken, yet deeply unfair. Before Keanu could press further, Liam shook his head. You've got good intentions, Reeves, but this isn't your fight. He turned and walked away, leaving Keanu standing alone. That evening, Elliot returned home from practice to find a large, unmarked package waiting on the porch. Amy, coming home from work, spotted it first. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't know," Elliot replied, equally puzzled. He opened the box cautiously. Inside was an array of top-tier hockey equipment. Skates, gloves, a helmet, and a stick, all brand new. Elliot's eyes widened as he ran his fingers over the pristine gear. He picked up a note tucked inside the box. It was simple, unsigned. For the one who never gives up. Who would do this? Amy wondered aloud, her voice filled with a mix of awe and suspicion. Elliot shook his head. "I don't know," he said, but a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Whoever had sent the gear believed in him, even if he didn't know why. Meanwhile, Keanu sat in his hotel room, staring out at the snowy streets of Toronto. His phone buzzed with reminders about the next day's film shoot, but his mind was elsewhere. He pictured Elliot's face when he opened the box, imagining the flicker of hope it might ignite. The world of hockey was competitive, but for Elliot Kramer the battle extended beyond the rink. Unknown to him, powerful forces were working against his dream, and the shadow of their influence loomed larger than he could imagine. At the heart of this hidden conflict was Victor Grayson, a wealthy and influential manager in the local hockey league. Victor was a man used to getting what he wanted. His polished exterior masked a vindictive streak, especially when it came to protecting his son, Miles Grayson. 2 years ago, Elliot's rise as a young hockey star had meant Miles lost his spot on a top team. For Victor, it wasn't just about hockey, it was personal. Victor couldn't stomach the idea of Elliot returning to the sport and potentially outshining his son again, even after the accident. To him, Elliot's success was a reminder of Miles's shortcomings. Victor began using his influence to ensure Elliot faced roadblocks at every turn. League managers received quiet calls, coaches were pressured, and when that wasn't enough, Victor turned to smear tactics. Rumors started circulating, whispers of favoritism, pity, and charity. "He's only on the ice because people feel sorry for him," some said. "It's not about talent, it's about optics." These rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by Victor's subtle manipulation. For those who didn't know Elliot personally, the lies began to overshadow his hard work and skill. Meanwhile, Keanu was beginning to see the bigger picture. The new hockey equipment he'd sent anonymously had bolstered Elliot's spirit, but something still felt off. The constant rejections, the cold treatment from league officials, it didn't add up. Keanu's instincts told him there was more to uncover. Using his network and quiet persistence, Keanu started digging. Through hushed conversations and discreet inquiries, he began piecing together the truth. Victor Grayson's name came up again and again, tied to nearly every roadblock Elliot had faced. The deeper Keanu delved, the clearer Victor's involvement became. Keanu discovered the lengths Victor had gone to in discrediting Elliot. The phone calls to league organizers, the carefully planted rumors, even a bribe or two to ensure Elliot's applications were rejected without explanation. It was a calculated effort to keep Elliot off the ice and out of the spotlight. What struck Keanu the most wasn't just the cruelty of Victor's actions, but the fragility of the hockey world's hierarchy. One man's influence was enough to derail a promising young athlete's career. The injustice of it fueled Keanu's resolve, but he knew better than to confront Victor head-on. At least, not yet. For now, Keanu kept his discoveries to himself. He watched and waited, knowing that timing was everything. If he revealed the truth too soon, Victor might find a way to twist the narrative in his favor. Keanu needed to act carefully, to ensure that when the moment came, Victor's schemes would be exposed beyond denial. Elliot Kramer's days on the ice grew longer. Each practice felt like a battle, but his determination never wavered. His prosthetic leg ached more often than not, yet he refused to let it slow him down. Then, One crisp morning, a letter arrived that changed everything. Amy was the first to spot it in the mail. She ran into the small apartment they shared, her face alight with excitement. "Elliot, look!" she exclaimed, holding up the envelope. Elliot took it cautiously, his fingers trembling as he opened it. Inside was an official invitation to an open tryout for an international disabled hockey team. For Elliot, this wasn't just an opportunity, it was his last chance to prove he belonged on the ice. "Do you know what this means?" Amy asked, tears welling in her eyes. Elliot nodded, but his voice was hesitant. "It means I have to be perfect, no mistakes, no excuses." The cost of attending the tryout loomed over them. Amy, ever the pragmatist, quietly decided to cover the expenses. She cashed out her small savings, ignoring the protests of her co-workers and friends. "He deserves this," she told anyone who questioned her. "I'm not letting money hold him back." As the day of the tryout approached, Elliot threw himself into his training with renewed intensity. Coach Liam pushed him harder than ever, but beneath the tough exterior, Liam's pride in Elliot was clear. "You've got this, kid," he said one evening after a grueling practice. But not everyone wanted to see Elliot succeed. Victor Grayson had caught wind of the tryout. The thought of Elliot competing on an international stage, potentially outshining his son Miles, was more than he could bear. Victor had connections, and he wasn't afraid to use them. On the morning of the tryout, as Elliot and Amy arrived at the sprawling arena, Victor was already working behind the scenes. He had approached key organizers, slipping them envelopes stuffed with cash. "You know what to do," he said coldly. His instructions were clear: make sure Elliot didn't make it through, no matter how well he performed. Elliot stepped onto the ice that day with a mix of nerves and determination. The rink was packed with scouts, organizers, and other athletes. He could feel the weight of their stares, but he forced himself to focus. This was his moment. Amy watched from the stands, clutching her coat tightly. She whispered encouragement to herself, willing her brother to succeed. Meanwhile, Keanu sat a few rows behind her, unnoticed. He had arrived quietly, determined to see this through without drawing attention to himself. As the tryouts began, it became clear that something was off. Elliot was scoring higher than many of the other players, yet his name wasn't being acknowledged by the evaluators. His every move seemed to be ignored or dismissed. Amy noticed, too, her worry growing with each passing moment. Keanu had seen enough. He slipped away from the stands, pulling out his phone. In a matter of minutes, he made a series of calls. His tone was calm but firm, his words precise. The power of his reputation, coupled with his network, quickly reached the right ears. Back on the ice, Elliot continued to push himself, unaware of the forces working both against and for him. As the tryouts drew to a close, the evaluators hesitated. The bribes from Victor weighed on them, but so did the sudden pressure from Keanu's silent intervention. One of the lead organizers finally stepped forward. "Elliot Kramer," he called out. The crowd fell silent as Elliot looked up. "You've made it to the next round of evaluations." The arena erupted in applause, led by Amy, who jumped to her feet, tears streaming down her face. Victor, sitting far from the action, clenched his fists, his plan unraveling before his eyes. Keanu, still in the background, allowed himself a small smile. He had done what he could, ensuring that fairness prevailed. The rest was up to Elliot. The rink was silent, except for the sound of skates cutting through ice. All eyes were on Elliot as he weaved through the final drill, his movements precise and controlled. The judges whispered among themselves, their skepticism slowly giving way to amazement. Spectators leaned forward, captivated by the display. Each shot Elliot made found its mark, every stride a testament to his unyielding determination. As the last puck sailed into the net with a sharp crack, the crowd erupted into applause. Amy stood in the stands, her hands clasped tightly together, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she saw the spark of hope in her brother's eyes. Elliot skated to the center of the rink, breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked around, soaking in the moment. But just as the applause began to die down, a figure approached him, cutting through the ice with deliberate speed. It was Miles Grayson. Miles, tall and broad-shouldered, stopped inches from Elliot, his expression dark with frustration. The tension in the air was palpable as the crowd watched, unsure of what would happen next. "You think this changes anything?" Miles spat, his voice loud enough to echo through the arena. "You think you've earned your place here? You're just a pity project. You're stealing opportunities from people who actually deserve them." Elliot froze, the words hitting harder than any physical blow. But instead of reacting with anger, he took a deep breath. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as he looked Miles square in the eye. "I don't skate for pity," Elliot said, his voice steady but firm. "I skate because I love this game. If you think I'm here to take something from you, that's on you, but I'm not going to apologize for working hard and giving it everything I've got." The crowd, stunned by his calm response, began murmuring in admiration. Even the judges exchanged nods, clearly impressed by more than just Elliot's performance on the ice. Miles, taken aback by Elliot's composure, hesitated. Without another word, he turned and skated away, his shoulders hunched with defeat. Before the tension could settle, a familiar voice rang out from the stands. "Ladies and gentlemen," it said, calm yet commanding. Heads turned toward the source, and there he was, Keanu Reeves, standing near the front row. Keanu stepped onto the rink, his presence drawing every eye. He walked confidently to Elliot's side, placing a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "This kid," he began, his voice carrying through the arena, "is the real deal. I've watched him pour his heart into this game, despite everything life has thrown at him." The crowd was riveted. Keanu's words carried weight, his passion undeniable. It's easy to tear someone down, to doubt them when they're trying to rise. But what Elliot has shown us here today is what hockey and life is all about. Perseverance, grit, and never letting anyone tell you you're not good enough. As murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience, Keanu turned his gaze toward the judges. "This isn't just about fairness, it's about recognizing greatness when we see it. And if you can't see that in Elliot, then maybe you don't belong in this sport." The judges exchanged looks, visibly shaken by the intensity of Keanu's words. One of them, the head evaluator, finally stood and cleared his throat. "We've seen enough," he said, his voice steady. "Elliot Kramer, you've earned your spot on this team." The crowd erupted, louder than ever before. Amy clapped her hands over her mouth, her tears flowing freely. Elliot, overwhelmed, could barely process what had just happened. As the applause surged around him, he turned to Keanu, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you." Keanu smiled, shaking his head. "You did this, Elliot. I just made sure the world saw it." The arena grew quiet as the head evaluator walked to the microphone, his voice steady but firm. "After careful consideration, we are proud to announce that Elliot Kramer has earned his place on the international team." For a moment there was silence. Then, like a dam breaking, the crowd erupted in cheers. Amy jumped to her feet, her face wet with tears, clapping with all her might. Coach Liam, leaning against the boards, gave a small but approving nod. "About time," he muttered under his breath. Elliot stood on the ice, stunned. The weight of everything, years of struggle, countless sacrifices, endless doubts, suddenly felt worth it. He blinked hard, trying to hold back tears as his teammates skated over to pat him on the back. For the first time in years, he felt he truly belonged. In the stands, Victor Grayson sat stone-faced, his jaw tight as the announcement echoed through the arena. His carefully laid plans to sabotage Elliot had crumbled before his eyes. The bribes, the whispers, the manipulation, it had all been for nothing. Miles, sitting beside him, avoided his father's gaze, his shoulders hunched in silent shame. Victor stood abruptly, his lips pressed into a thin line. Without a word, he made his way toward the exit. His retreat was as quiet as it was absolute, his presence already fading from the celebration around him. Later that evening, as the arena emptied and the crowd dispersed, Keanu approached Elliot, Amy, and Coach Liam. They stood near the rink, the ice now still and glistening under the lights. Keanu's expression was calm, but his eyes held a deep warmth. "Elliot," he began, his voice steady, "I've seen a lot of incredible stories in my life, but yours is something special. What you've accomplished today, it's more than just making a team. You've shown everyone what resilience looks like." Elliot, still overwhelmed, managed a quiet, "Thank you." Amy, standing close by, wiped at her eyes, her pride for her brother unmistakable. Keanu continued, his tone becoming more deliberate. "I've been thinking a lot about what I've seen here. Your journey, your struggles. They've inspired me in ways I didn't expect. And I don't think your story ends here." Elliot tilted his head, confused. "What do you mean?" Keanu smiled. "I'm starting something new. A scholarship fund for athletes with disabilities. It'll provide the resources, training, equipment, opportunities that so many don't get. And I want you, Elliot, to be part of it. Not just as someone we help, but as the face of it, an ambassador, someone who can show others that there's always a way forward. The air seemed to still for a moment. Amy's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Coach Liam let out a low whistle, his approval evident. Elliot, for his part, looked at Keanu, his voice thick with emotion. I don't even know what to say. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to say anything right now. Just keep doing what you've been doing. The rest will follow. Weeks later, the day of Elliot's first international game arrived. The arena was alive with energy, packed with fans from around the world. Elliot skated onto the ice with his team, his heart pounding but his focus sharp. The lights above were blinding, the cheers deafening. Yet, as he moved, he felt calm. In the stands, Keanu watched quietly, his presence unnoticed by most. He wasn't there for attention or accolades. He was there to witness the culmination of a story he had only been a small part of. A story of perseverance, courage, and the unyielding power. Beside him, Amy sat with her hands clasped, her face glowing with pride. Coach Liam leaned forward, clapping loudly every time Elliot made a play. Together they celebrated not just the victory on the ice, but the victory over everything that had tried to hold Elliot back. As the final whistle blew and Elliot raised his stick in triumph, his eyes sought out Keanu's in the crowd. When their gazes met, there was no need for words. A small, knowing smile passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come. If you enjoyed this story, hit like and subscribe for more inspiring tales that stay with you long after the credits.